Welcome to the 4th edition of Training to Climb. This is rising above expectation, and we'll be climbing up Gibraltar Road to a total elevation of roughly 4,000 feet above sea level. We're here in Santa Barbara, just along the Pacific Coast Highway, and we're going to turn into town and start our ascent from there slowly. This is a nice warm up here, And we'll go a little bit over the training tools on the screen so you can dial in the ride a little bit better. We've got about a half an hour where we're going to be warming up for the big climb ahead. So I'm lucky enough to have along a guest today. Her name is Fran. She's an active cyclist and works in the cycling industry. And I sent out several requests for help with this training narrative, and I was surprised by the number of guests, or the number of people who wanted to help guest with the project. I had spin instructors, cycling coaches, and other avid cyclists willing to help. But I met Fran, and her and I had a lengthy conversation about her experiences about cycling and about life, and found myself completely engaged in conversation. We only had a short time to talk, but I wanted our conversation to go longer, so I invited her on this ride today. Hi, Fran.
Hi, Paul. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. So cycling is a very mental sport, and it's as much mental as it is physical. And once you push yourself beyond what you expect of yourself, you feel like you can pretty much accomplish anything. And so that's why, hence the title here, Rising Above Expectation. This is one of those hill climbs that you may not really ever expect to complete on your own without SAG support. And we're hopping off the road, and we're going to get on the bike trail here. The beach is on our right. This is pretty much a nice steady downhill, and we're taking it real easy. We're going to warm up nice and slowly. Now I'd like to introduce you a little bit to the training graphics on the screen, in case you've never used one of these before, or one of these videos. The most important thing is right on the left side of the screen, you see the 54%. That's our maximum heart rate as a percent of max. If you know your heart rate zones, as you can convert from beats per minute to percent, that's fine. Some heart rate monitors will do this for you. We don't use beats per minute on here because everybody's maximum heart rate is a little bit different, and some of you guys might not be able to match. My max might be too high for some, and my max might be too low for others. So we use a percentage of maximum, which is simply your current heart rate divided by your maximum heart rate. 54%, you should be barely feeling anything. But don't worry, that number will go up. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see two colored graphs, an upper and a lower. And the upper graph is actually showing us our hill profile. And you can see that right now it's pretty flat. There's not much going on. In about a half an hour or so, the grade increases, and we'll start really getting our workout. Below that that hill profile is our heart rate profile, and right now you can see that the black line, which is traversing both graphs, you can see it's just before the line turns green, and we'll be just steadily increasing our effort. So we try not to hit this guy. But right now we're taking it real easy. On the bottom left, you'll see 0 RPM. That's our cadence. We're just coasting through here, trying to be safe. And every once in a while, we're going to pedal and get our speed up. That'll probably be a more important tool once we actually hit the climb, trying to match your cadence and the resistance. Might be a little tricky, so I'd probably focus a little bit more on cadence once we hit the climbs. On the right, you'll see a little graphic that shows us what our gear ratio is. And what I want to focus on right now is just simply the resistance value, which is the very lowest number right now, indicating a 3, now a 2. And this is basically on a scale of 1 to 10, how much resistance we should have on our trainer. A 3 being a fairly easy, low resistance pedal. And a 5 is going to be, or not a 5, a 10 out of 10 is a low cadence, high resistance, out of the saddle, or just really working your legs hard. Every once in a while, a graphic will pop up on the screen of a water bottle, which is just a reminder to take a drink of water. It's important that while we're doing this, we don't dehydrate, because we'll be sweating buckets. And many times people will fail to drink enough water, and they only drink when they feel thirsty. And when that starts happening, then you're already kind of in a position where you're going to have a hard time recovering. You don't want to feel dehydrated at all. Speaking of which, so right now our heart rate's at 60% of max. We're still in zone 1. You can kind of tell by the heart rate profile down below that basically zone 1 is green. Zone 2 to 3 would be yellow. And zone 3 to 4 is red, meaning that when we start hitting those red sections, or bright orange, our heart rate is in the high 80s, low 90s. And coming up to a stop sign. Here's our little overview map showing us where we've started. Give us an idea, scoping out the route, where we're at, and what's to come. So we just came down the Pacific Coast Trail here. And now we're looking dead west towards the Santa Ynez range. We can start adding a little resistance here, make it feel like we're coming off the start, build up our speed a little bit, and then drop our resistance just a little bit. And through town, it's kind of fun to follow the gear changes. Keeping the tempo up right around 90 RPM, and slowing it down as we come to the stoplight. These little stoplights are kind of fun for the intervals. Interval training. Add some resistance. Let's bring up our speed a little bit. And now we can drop it down. Low resistance, higher cadence. A little hill here, so we're going to bring the resistance back up. To a 5, 6 out of 10. We got a little climb here up to the light. and bring it back down. Take a little breather at the light, drink some water. And here we go. So just like you're starting out from a standstill, add a little resistance. Get your speed up. And now we should be looking at our heart rate indicators. We're about 70% of max. Slowly building our efforts up. Add some resistance, bring our speed up. Let's get the bike accelerating. Cadence is about 90. Yeah. Fran, what's your, do you have a beats per minute or percent of
Yeah,
max?
I'm at 126 right now, 125.
What does that convert to?
Well, I call it zone 1 for me.
Okay.
Probably very close to that 70-75% of
Okay.
max.
Good. You know that Garmin does percent of max.
I need to learn how to program it better. So many controls on it. I've had to pare it down to what I can easily manage and understand on a ride, but thank you for that tip.
Sure thing. And we're going to do a little track stand here for a little bit. We're not going to be successful.
Not I.
I was going to edit that. Forgot to edit that part out. Oops.
Been working on that for years, I have.
Should also know there's a little delay. There's about a 30-second lag time between. Well, your heart rate takes about 30 seconds to actually change based on applied effort. So I've tried to synchronize the heart rate with the video. But just keep in mind that if you see a change in gear ratio that's putting you into the red, your effort will probably sync pretty nicely with the effort on the screen, but you just have to give it a few seconds before you see those changes on the screen indicate. So just because you see a lower effort and high gear ratio doesn't mean that you shouldn't start really working, because eventually it'll all catch up. So we're accelerating the bike again. 5 out of 10 on the resistance. You know, we're actually in a little heavier gear here because we're starting to feel a little bit of the grade. Yeah, a little uphill here. It's pretty steady. There's not much more downhill from this point on.
Up we go.
Up. So we're only decelerating for the lights. We'll use this time to get those legs warmed up. Once we hit the harder stuff, if you're not warmed up by the time we get to the harder stuff, it's really hard to get that effort up. So I always keep the legs moving, even if the cadence shows you 0. I like to just soft pedal throughout the whole ride at least. And we add some resistance as we begin our accelerating the bike again. Yeah, Santa Barbara is a really beautiful town. I kind of wish that the day was sunny and bright, but luck would have it that the entire week I was out, it was overcast like this. But it actually turned out, I think, pretty cool.
Maybe a relief for the climb.
Once we get into the clouds, it's very magical, mystical. Really a neat feeling. When I was doing the ride myself, it was a little frightening, so I couldn't see, anything around the next corner, and I kept hearing these strange noises from the mountain. That's just not right.
I was going to say, are we challenged here?
I don't think he's going up to Gibraltar. And add a little bit more resistance. There's our water bottle. And take it down. Come to the stoplight. And back up again. Noisy traffic. And 6 out of 10 on the resistance. Keeping the cadence in the mid 80s. Heart rate is just sub 80. We're still aerobic. We should be feeling a little sweat now. Come back down. And back up. Well, pretty soon we'll be making a right turn, and that's when the climbs really start. So just prepare yourself. Your effort's going to go up, and your legs are going to really be pushing hard on the pedals. Gibraltar is about an average of an 8% grade. There's steeper areas. So if you're not up for it, just stop the video and start it from the beginning again. This part's fun. All right. Start adding some more resistance. 6 out of 10. Pedaling cadence is coming down just a little bit. Now we're big ring up front. Start adding a little more resistance. And a little more. 7 out of 10. A little hill in front of us. Let's get that heart rate up to the mid 80s. And take some resistance off here. And add some resistance. We begin accelerating the bike. Heart rate is still in the low 80s. I hear you shifting over there, Fran. You're staying on it.
Yeah. Pacing myself.
And we're in a nice climbing gear. Climbing gear being one that you can maintain a cadence of around 80 RPM and keeping the heart rate anaerobic. And big ring up front. Let's start this climb. That's the Santa Barbara Mission and Museum right in front of us. And a little bigger gear here. Getting the heart rate up a little higher each time. I love the shot of the birds flying off the... It's cool looking.
It's a very cool building.
Oh,
Never seen that before.
it's crazy. Inside is even more elaborate. Alright, so this is pretty much the official start of the hard part. We're not on Gibraltar Road yet. Watch the gear changes. 6 out of 10 here. You can see the little mini window on the bottom right. Let's take a little effort off our legs. Just a short pause in the action there. It's even noisier when you're there. Okay, back in our climbing gear. Big ring up front. Cadence right around 80. So Fran, when I sent out some emails, and I told you about the project that I'm doing, I'm just curious what motivated you to help out.
Well, I was curious actually. At first I thought maybe you'd found the wrong person, hence our little chat on Facebook. And then when we actually spoke, it just sounded like a really fun thing to do. Spoke to a lot of parts of me, a lot of things that I enjoy or have done or all of the above, so we just kept talking and yeah, here I am.
Well, I appreciate it.
I know you told me that we're probably going to head into the clouds, and I told you in our conversation that I was in Hawaii for the first time in October and drove up the volcano there on Maui through a cloud. Sadly I didn't have my bike with me, but it was still a very cool experience. And then we got to the top above the clouds, almost like being in a plane. And as you were describing the ride to me, I was thinking of that drive.
Right.
Of course, I told somebody that story the other day, and they said, "You went to Maui, and you didn't climb Haleakala. I guess I have to go back."
Yeah, I wouldn't mind getting my bike out there.
Well, it certainly, once I could see it by car, I wished I had had the opportunity, but for various reasons it wasn't the right vacation or the right trip, so yeah. I'll go back.
Alright, descending here. Let our heart rate come down just a little. Soft pedal. So starting out with the basics, here's a dumb question. So where are you from?
Well, sometimes it's hard to tell. I've been here for, 35, 36 years now. I'm losing track, but
wow.
I am from Yorkshire originally, Yorkshire in England, home of Tommy Simpson and Beryl Burton, for those who can remember that far back. So I lived there till I was 20, and then came over here as a student and didn't intend to stay, but through a course of events I ended up never going back, moving around quite a bit within the States, and then I've been here in Denver almost 30 years.
Wow. When did you start cycling?
I think my father got me my first two-wheeler, if you will, when I was probably 7 or 8. I can remember going to somebody's house one Sunday afternoon and they had a two-wheeler and they couldn't get me off it. I was probably about 7 at the time, so Dad bought me my first little bike then, and then the biggie was he had a a girl's frame, custom built with drop handlebars, and Father Christmas brought that to me when I was 10. So that was when the time came that Dad and I could start riding together. Because he enjoyed riding. He wasn't too serious, but he'd done his share of cycling around England as a younger man, so he was, I think, really happy and excited, I know he was, that I was showing an interest. So he encouraged me a great deal, and I cycled fairly consistently until probably 14, and when I say consistently, with my father, just around where we lived in Yorkshire, but sucking up all the cycling information that I could get back then, which wasn't much. I remember one day we were on the road called the A1. In those days we called it the Great North Road. It was an original Roman road, and we saw Beryl Burton out training, and that was just so special and so motivating. And at the time, the tender age of 10 or 11, I wanted to be the next Beryl Burton. But by the time I was in my mid-teens, there was just no women to cycle with. It was a very difficult sport to do.
Right.
And I've just found that tennis made more sense for many reasons. So I played tennis quite seriously until after university and coming over here. And then it wasn't until probably 23 or 24, and I brought my bike over from England and quickly realised how old tech it was. So I went out and bought my first decent 10-speed, which was a rally, because I was patriotic, having been to the University of Nottingham. And really that was it, starting in Atlanta when I was about 24.
Wow. What brought you out to the States?
A lark one summer. I came twice. The first summer I came as a 19-year-old student. I came as a nanny for a family in Washington, D.C. And it was actually the summer of Watergate. So it was pretty amazing being in that part of the world when that was going on. And then I did a Greyhound trip around the eastern portion of the US, all the way up to Toronto and down to New Orleans and back to Washington. And I had such a good time, I decided I'd go back and recruit others and come back and see the West Coast. So the following year is when I came over here with 3 others, and we made our way to the West Coast, and that's where the story got interesting.
Oh.
What began as a request for a sabbatical ended up being permanent residency.
Wow.
I just really embraced the culture and just found things to do to make a living and feel as though I was more fulfilled than I had been back in the UK. So that's how it started.
Wow. Now, if you guys out there don't already realize this, Fran and I are both riding. We're both working at about the same efforts as you are. So if you're out of breath, we're out of breath. If you're hurting, well, at least I'm hurting.
Like I said, pacing myself.
Yeah. Big ring up front. So you moved to Colorado, and you're cycling out here, and I'm assuming that you enjoy the mountains. What I guess what my question is what What do you excel at on the bike? What's your favorite thing to do? Type of riding?
Well, I think more than anything, I'm probably just an endurance rider in that I'm not much of a no sprinter, and I'm a little bit too big to be a particularly good hill climber. But I do love the challenge of a hill, or hills, or mountains. So I would say that's been probably my most favourite aspect of cycling from moving out to Colorado anyway.
And you're lucky enough now to work in the cycling industry.
Yes.
What do you do?
I can't believe my luck.
By the way, we're a 10 out of 10 here on Resistance Fran Shift. We're grinding up this really big, painful climb.
So, I work for a company called Smart E-Tailing. I'm in the
Smart E-Tailing.
Smart E-Tailing, as in retailing without the R. And we're a 10-year-old company. And basically we host websites for bicycle retailers throughout North America. We write the content for them, and we help them get the best out of their online presence. So I'm in the client services department and have been for almost 6 years.
Wow.
And talk to bike shops all around North America. So it's very cool.
Do you travel?
Not very much. Only once a year, really. We all go down to Interbike in Vegas in September. I've been up to Madison once for Track World, and in a couple of weeks I'm heading up to Minneapolis, QBP, which is a big wholesale company, wholesaler. They have a winter show for their retailers, so we'll go there and have a presence, but most of it, all of it, except for that, is done from my home, which is wonderful.
That's awesome.
No commuting, no work wardrobe.
You're going to be on your trainer and answering the phones at the same time, right?
You know, I could be, but I've never done that. I have to focus a little too hard for that.
Yeah, oh, I have a great office. It's my bike.
Yeah. Yes, you do. Well, I think I was very lucky to find this. I came back into the work world after a number of years away and stumbled across this job. It was an ad in the back of Velo News, and honestly I really applied just to kind of get practice, because I thought it'd be a long road before I could find something.
Right.
And lo and behold, they offered me a job.
We are on Gibraltar Road here, and this basically is going to stay this road all the way to the end at about this kind of grade. You can see from the effort profile that we're going to be up in the high 80s, low 90s for pretty much the duration of this ride. You up for that?
Yep.
And there's a couple of little dips in effort. Usually those dips are as a result of me stopping to check my batteries.
Oh. You mean we don't get a downhill?
So yeah, no. You guys on your trainers, me included, don't get a break. But we should really focus on our effort, that we're not going into the red too much, and we're really pacing ourselves and monitoring our effort here. Because hill climbing is all about pacing. And I try in my best efforts to maintain my effort in the high 80s on a steep climb like this. Here's that first break here. It's not a long one. But in this case, on this hill, there's sections that get so steep, you have to really drive up that heart rate in order to keep the bike from tipping over.
Uh-oh, I got the wrong gears.
Being a
You
hill,
didn't tell me that bit.
it's right in front of you. We're in a nice climbing gear here. We're not working too hard, keeping that heart rate down around 83%. Let's recover a little bit. There's my battery change. Let's maintain the same gear, no shifting yet. We'll go into heavier gear here pretty soon. Keeping the heart rate in the mid 80s is good. We're in a climbing gear. Now big ring up front. 7 out of 10. Keeping the cadence right around 70, 75. Nice climbing cadence. It's really, we should be feeling our legs here. Yeah, applying positive pressure on the pedals. If you're on a spin bike, make sure you have enough resistance so that the flywheel isn't carrying your legs around, and you should be applying a positive pressure on each stroke, maintaining a cadence mid to high 70s. So Fran has from my talking to her, very active lifestyle. You enjoy cycling, Nordic skiing, running, skate skiing, and you're a triathlete. You look rock hard, and you have the spunk of a 20-year-old.
Why, thank you.
But you're doing this at what age, Fran?
57, just had her birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you.
So now we were talking a little bit about how gender plays a role in the sport of cycling. How does age and gender, what insights can you give me on that?
Well, I don't think much at all, honestly. As I said, when I was a teenager, certainly the majority of cyclists were men, whether it was racing or recreational.
Nice and steep here. Yeah.
And I don't know the percentages, but you read more and more in the industry journals about how a smart retailer specifically focuses on his female clientele. Not that we want special attention, but we might want different attention.
Right.
Whether it's the actual equipment and so on. So, I know lots and lots and lots of women who ride of my age and older. I've been trying my hand at cyclocross for the last few years, and I was up in Bend, Oregon for the Nationals in December.
Wow.
And the last time we had, last but one, Nationals in Portland, I think it was 2003. And at that time, I would have been, I think, just tipping into the 50 plus category.
Right.
And if I remember, we were actually racing 45 plus, and that was the only category for women as far as masters categories is concerned.
Right.
And now there is a category for every 5 years, and I wish I could say how many people were lined up for everything from 45 up. 20, 30 in each category perhaps. And when it got to my category, which didn't exist obviously 8 or 9 years ago, there were about 10 or 11 of us, 55 plus.
Right.
So, kind of a long way to answer the question, but that race attracted women of my age in a really hardcore, silly, fun, challenging discipline. And I have to think if that many women of my age turn out for a race like that in the conditions that we knew we'd be facing, there's many, 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 many more around the country, around the world, who cycle on the road for pleasure, not to mention mountain biking. So it makes no difference. Other than the fact, I'm sure we all lament the fact that we are getting slower. But that's not gender specific, so.
No. Oh, my wife tells me a lot that it's tough for her to get out on the road and on with groups. She feels like it's a male-dominated sport, and I suppose in a way that's true, and there might be some anxiety. I mean, do you feel any of that, or what would you suggest to overcome that?
Find women's groups to ride with. There are plenty.
Oh yeah.
I say plenty. There's enough. A lot of bike shops have shop rides, and some of them will be geared specifically to either women or, what I might call entry-level cyclists, those that are intimidated by perhaps the speed and the numbers.
Right.
So you may have to do a little digging, but there's plenty of opportunities to find like riders, male or female.
Well, you told me you don't like the big mass start rides, group rides. Does this play a role, or no? Is it just the craziness of the ride? Or?
Yeah, no, it's not gender specific at all. You just said it, the craziness of the ride.
Right.
I've done the Elephant Rock more times than I can count, and the last 2 or 3 times just found the amount of focus I had to keep on other riders as opposed to enjoying the ride itself made it not much fun for me. So
right.
I mean, it's a great ride and it gets bigger every year, but I guess that makes me a little bit more of a solo rider.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to go off on my own and ride long distances, maybe with one other person, but even then you have a pace situation to maintain, so there's a lot to be said for riding solo.
And you also race.
Well, as I said, I'm still keeping my hand in cyclocross. I do like to time trial, and I've done our local time trial series here for many, many years, so that's always fun, challenging, painful, but it's a competition mostly against me.
Right.
I'm not going to say I don't look at other people's times, but I've always enjoyed those, which is why I gravitated towards triathlons a number of years ago. When I arrived in Colorado, I did try my hand at racing, and my first race, only race actually, was around Lake Dillon.
Okay.
And it was the day that Alexi Greywall won his gold medal in LA.
Oh, nice.
And we were all lined up for this race. I really had no idea what to expect. Everybody went from the gun like bats out of hell. I wasn't expecting it, so I was chasing to catch back up. And about 2 miles into the race, out on Highway 6, there's this big pile up on the right, and half the pack had gone down. And that's when I said to myself, thank goodness I wasn't with them.
Wow.
And I don't know that this is for me. So I finished the ride around the lake, came back into the bike shop that was streaming the race from LA, and watched Alexi get his gold.
Nice.
So it was, that day will stick in my mind forever. So from there, somebody told me there was this thing called triathlon, and maybe by then I'd watched the Ironman on television, but that sounded more my speed. So I wasn't a swimmer. I had no choice but to get in the pool. I won't tell you how bad I was, but I had also been running by that time for many years, so it combined the 2.5. So I started doing triathlons, and within a couple of years of that, duathlons hit the scene. So I could drop the swimming, and I did duathlons for 10, 12 years, I guess.
Wow.
Until my mid-40s. And that's when I did my first road race, and I did it because my son was starting to get into racing.
Right.
So it just made sense to at least put my toe in the water. So I did one race, did really well, was surprised, and decided to do a few more after that. But
wow,
I can honestly say that every time I lined up, I would have a big knot in my stomach about the pack thing. So
right.
I'm not really missing it at this point.
So you said your son races for Garmin, right?
Yeah, he's actually on their development team. His last year as a U23, and he came up through the ranks 3 or 4 years with other teams around the Front Range, and then when he was 16, he went to ride for Jonathan Vorta's team, which in those days was TIA Craft, 5280 TIA Craft, and of course that has since morphed into what is now Garmin Cervelo. But Jonathan has always kept his commitment to continue to develop young riders, so
oh wow,
Daniel stayed with him this entire time, and as I said, it's his last year as a U23, and obviously has great hopes he will be on the big team eventually.
Wow, that'd be great.
Certainly will. I live vicariously through him.
Yeah, and you also started him riding, right?
Well, I did. I mean, as crazy as I've always been about bikes, when we brought his baby sister home when he was 4.5, we presented him with his first 2-wheeler with training wheels, and by the end of the afternoon he was weaving around cones on the driveway, and really didn't look back. He wanted a BMX bike. Well, he got a mountain bike after that, but then he tried BMX for a while. Then he went to dual slaloming, except he was on a 24-inch unsuspended mountain bike, which I wish I had more on video. He would line up against the next youngest rider. And these guys that were promoting those races on the front range back then were so kind, and they just wanted him to have a go and have fun. So he did that for a while. Probably around about 10 or so, he was starting to beg for a downhill bike, and we said absolutely not. You've got a decent mountain bike. By this time he had a dual suspension, and we just put our foot down from a safety standpoint.
Yeah. Parents.
Well, who knows where he would have gone.
Well, I mean, now he's racing.
Well, then
That's a real safe sport.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, somebody was nice enough to lend him a little custom-made Zinn, that's right. The bike was called Zippy. It belonged to Karen Hornbostel, who was one of the primary supporters of junior racing in Colorado 10 years ago. So, a couple of trips around the local reservoir, and then he wanted to ride Loveland, so we were on our way up there for the weekend, and we took Zippy to the bottom of Loveland, put him on it, and he rode up, and he's grinning from ear to ear, and never really looked back in terms of road. I mean, he's had lots of mountain bikes and done some racing, but he really took to road riding, and I think his mountain bike experience really helped him cross over into, pardon the pun, but cyclocross.
Right.
So he's done extremely well in his cyclocross career, and for a while did seriously contemplate taking that to the pro level. But has decided against that for many reasons. So this time last week he was finishing his last U23 World Championship in Germany, and his cross career as a U23 is over. So it's full onto the road now.
Right.
Almost at cloud level. The conditions are the same as before.
Yeah, this part of the road is just
a lot of climbing left.
it was very intimidating when I was climbing up here. It's hard to see off the edge, but it was a very steep edge, and those boulders are what keep you from going off. Every once in a while we come across a stop sign right in the middle of the road, and there's nothing, no car crossing, and if you see that stop sign, that's for a rock crossing. And through this ride I was hearing rocks kind of scuttling down the hill.
So there's just certain places where they typically will fall.
Yeah, I have slope stability issues. And you can see the road cut ahead. We got a long way to go.
Is it one of those climbs where we don't see the summit till we're there?
I actually won't even see the summit on this disc.
Okay.
There's a false summit that we stop at, and then disc 2 will start from there. But yeah, when you get to the Ridge Road, it's pretty spectacular. You got a view to the left and the right, and you're like right along the ridge. I'll show you some of it. It's pretty cool stuff. So, Fran, you started cycling in England, and I guess what I'm curious about is the cultural difference riding. What's it like riding in England versus here, at least from your recollection? I know you've been out here a long time.
Well, I would say that the bicycle is definitely a much more accepted mode of transportation. Always has been, still is. Not to say that most families have 2 cars,
right?
Although they often don't have places to keep them. So I think when I go back, I'm aware that cyclists on the road get a lot more respect from a typical driver. Slowing down to pass if there's an oncoming car rather than just squeezing in between, which we all know is an unpleasant experience. It's not always necessarily unsafe. I mean, there might be three feet and all, but there's just a greater, I think, my observation has been a greater respect for a typical cyclist on the road. And I think what's cool about this country, and I'm seeing it obviously being in the industry, is how many people have embraced cycling, commuting by bike, that may or may not be, big time weekend riders, but cities like Portland, certainly Denver, more and more people are realizing that that's a very smart way to get to work. Whether it's cost, social cost, health, pollution, lack thereof, time. So, I think from that perspective, there's a lot of similarities. And I do get a daily e-magazine, e-newsletter from the UK every day, and I read it. So, it does give me lots of little sound bites into that culture. One I read yesterday that I'm not sure how I feel about this. An MP, a member of Parliament, has submitted his cycling expenses, which amount to 40p, which is a little less. Well, my conversion rate isn't very good these days, but maybe 50-60 cents.
Okay.
And it's splashed all over the front of one newspaper, which is a right-wing conservative newspaper, complaining, calling him out for this, saying, why would you?
Right. Whereas
his supporters are saying, if he can claim for a car, why can't he claim for his bike?
Right.
Obviously, nice bit of sensational news for this newspaper, which is one of those sensational type of newspapers.
Okay.
Anyway, I just read that yesterday.
That's cool.
I mean, I think my reaction was, he's certainly within his rights, but think of the paperwork he's generated to get 40p back.
Right.
That's probably not very PC.
That's funny. Little reprieve here. Take it easy on the legs.
Lots more fun on the top.
Well, it seems out here in Denver we have it's very polarized cycling environment. I mean, on one side you've got the motorists who are also cyclists, most likely, and there's so many out here that's a good number of people, and they are very courteous and respectful. I mean, we also have an incredible trail network, so it's sometimes hard to even measure the temperature of the drivers because you're always on the trails out here. But every once in a while, you run out into a driver who just hates cyclists, you know, and,
Yep.
and will do whatever they can to fire you up, I guess, you know. I'm wondering, does that dichotomy, I guess, does that exist out in the UK? Do you see such a polarized, over country versus urban, or, kind of like out here?
Well, again, I shouldn't really voice an opinion. I can just make an observation. I did see a YouTube video of a run-in between an elderly driver and his wife and a cyclist, and one would have to say from that the cyclist was doing no wrong,
right?
But at the same token, he got defensive.
The cyclist?
The driver got defensive. Sad to say, I think we have to try our hardest to not be drawn into escalation.
Right.
Really, if I think about because I do most of my riding on the road, and if I think about the number of miles I ride on the road and the number of cars that I encounter, and then did a percentage of those that
are cool.
Well, I meant the opposite, that they are not.
Oh, okay.
It's very, very low.
Low, right.
Most are cool, yeah.
Most are cool, yeah.
So, I do try, and I think that many cyclists, I hope, take this the same way. In other words, I'm not a saint. If there's nobody around at a stop sign, I might roll through it.
Right.
But I do try, when I'm around traffic, to act as the cars do and wait for the lights and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we do that as a body, the more the respect is going to rise, because it's the same as I've just alluded to with a car. It takes one car with some road rage against a cyclist to make us all feel as though
everybody like that.
Exactly. So one cyclist blatantly running a red light, God forbid no helmet, riding no-handed, cool as a cucumber, that does a tremendous amount of damage.
Well, I think the biggest problem is on both sides, it's that feeling of entitlement.
Yes.
Cyclists feel like they have a right to the road, and the entire lane is at their discretion, and there's truth to that. And then there's the motorists who feel the same way.
Yeah.
The roads are for the cars and not for the bikes, and so I think it's really that issue of entitlement that hurts us the most.
And I will go back to that. So we were talking about
culture,
the big races. Well, I was sitting not races, but big rides, charity rides, and whatnot.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that is more the norm than not. You will find these packs of 3 and 4 and 5 across the road.
Oh yeah.
And it's not a closed road. State Patrol comes up, tells them to move over. If you look back or they're ahead of you, they just move right out again. I frankly don't get that. Because that's not winning us friends among the State Patrol when they see that kind of behaviour.
Right.
And again, I don't want to come off here as being pious or a saint or anything, but I think it's common sense. We've got to share the road, just like the slogan says.
Yeah. Now we're about halfway up this climb. Yeah, I'm just trying to demotivate you guys.
You like the spinning instructor that says 50 minutes and it's really 30?
Yeah.
Or seconds?
Well, I drove up this climb before I rode it, and I think that was a mistake. So I was really intimidated. I was like, oh my God, I just keep going. But had to see what I was in for.
Well, again, that's That's where cars and bikes, it's just there's no comparison. I have done the same thing and driven something and...
See that road cut there, Fran?
Oh yeah.
Isn't that look pretty?
Very cool. Yep. So, it's not always a good idea to see it by car because a little touch of the accelerator and up you go, and
right.
It's just not the same on a bike.
Well, Fran, you told me about something in your past that I was really impressed with, and that you definitely had to rise beyond your expectations, to coin a phrase. Fran is a breast cancer survivor.
Walking up a flight of stairs.
Yes?
Yep, thank you. Thank you, universe and modern technology.
When was that diagnosed, Fran?
Well, the actual diagnosis is coming up on 6 years.
Wow, not that long ago.
No, I officially passed the 5-year survivorship at the end of my anniversary of my treatment, so that was last October. So the insurance companies like that.
I'll bet. Now, how far did it go? I mean, when did you catch it?
Well, I was very lucky. We caught it early, but it was a very aggressive form of cancer.
Oh.
So...
I know there's 2 forms. What are they?
Well, there's actually a lot of variations. Mine was one of the more difficult to treat because it was not, let me think, estrogen positive, which I think I have this right, that responds to tamoxifen. And some other things that were not as well known, and therefore there aren't known methodologies for, improving survivor rate. And then I had one specific marker that's very rare, and they know very little about. So all that made it especially challenging. Had a great doctor who, I can't say enough, just took me through the whole thing, prescribed the very aggressive chemo treatment, and consulted with a nationally known breast cancer expert, and I was prescribed. Ooh.
Here's the shot. That's the shot of that road cut we looked
that's
at.
Cool.
Isn't that neat?
Yep.
Sorry.
So they prescribed a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 6 rounds of chemo, 3 weeks apart, and I was very optimistic going into it that, okay, fine, I'm in the good hands and no big deal. Having other people go through this and life goes on. So the very first treatment, came home and mowed the lawn and went about my day, or the rest of my day. Woke up the next morning and I could not get out of bed.
Oh no.
Basically, and I'm sure we all respond differently, but I could not keep enough fluids in.
Oh man.
And with each round it became tougher. So having assumed I would continue to exercise all the way through that summer, by the time of the second round I just gave up.
Oh no.
I couldn't do it. It was just how, yeah. I mean, there was no getting out of breath. There was no, basically, this is why working from home was such a godsend, because I would work for a while and then let my team know I was done for the day, and I could take about 6 steps and be on the sofa.
Right.
Where I spent more days. I can't remember. I had such bad chemo brain.
Chemo brain.
Yeah, that was something else I didn't know about, but
man.
I can only say it's probably like having severe ADD.
Wow.
I could not focus. So,
A few hundred feet into the
I mean, really, the summer goes into a blur.
This doesn't
I definitely would do better
seem real foggy.
in weeks 2 and 3 between treatments.
How's it?
But what got me through, as I was lying there, I would think about two things actually. I did think a lot about cycling and the analogy of climbing a hill. And for me, the one that I used was Mount Evans here in Colorado, which isn't that steep, but as we all know, it goes awfully high and the oxygen deprivation is fairly substantial.
Mount Evans goes up to 14,500 feet, the highest paved road in the country or world, I don't know. It's big, it's high.
Certainly in the US, yeah.
Climbing it as a teenager is an accomplishment.
And you did that.
As a teenager.
Well done. I would say so.
Now you
Blind
did this.
faith.
You did this after your rehabilitation.
Well, no, I'd climbed Mount Evans many times before,
Okay.
so that's how I could use that analogy. I've raced it a few times, and I would think most specifically about the time that I was racing it, and this doesn't sound like much, but for me at my age, I wanted to get under 3 hours, and so I just tried and focused so hard that entire ride, knowing the pain would end.
Eventually.
Yeah, and that's how I looked at this chemo, that I knew it would end. I wasn't going to die. I certainly didn't think I would. Very optimistic about the treatment. I just wanted to die at the time.
I shouldn't laugh.
No. Well, you have to, don't you?
I guess it is a lot like a hill climb.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's really very little reprieve. I mean, yes, you can get off and rest, but you have to keep going. So
Right.
that was one thing that really got me through. And the other thing, I mentioned her name earlier, wonderful woman who we've lost, but her name was Karen Hornbostel. She was my age, and she was diagnosed with breast cancer, I believe in her early 40s. She was a nationally ranked masters racer and licked it. So it went into remission. She came back to racing and had many good years on and off her bike. And we met her through my son's interest in junior racing.
Right.
And sadly, the fall of my treatment, she passed away.
Oh no.
But I thought about her a lot that summer, and we talked about her illness before mine was diagnosed, and she'd shared some things. So that was really helpful. And just to finish the story, I made it through 5 treatments, and the doctor could see how much I was suffering and called his expert, who said, she's made 4, well, she's made 5, we told her 4 minimum, 6 really isn't necessary, tell her she can quit. And I actually didn't want to,
Right.
but my doctor persuaded me that the 6th round
It's done.
really wouldn't make any difference except a whole lot more suffering.
Right.
So I don't know how that would be an analogy to. Maybe it would be going on and finishing this ride today.
So, your friend shared some words of wisdom with you then? I forget her name.
She did, Karen.
Karen. What'd she say?
Well, the one thing that stuck out, it sounds like a cliche, but I think most people that have had a huge setback in their life, very often, health thing.
Gets a little easier here, friend.
Okay. They'll say it's the best thing that ever happened to them.
What's that? Oh, the
illness.
Really?
It just makes you appreciate what you have. And I mean, that's the one thing that really stuck out before I became ill, and then once I became ill, I would just think about all that Karen had been through and the number of times she'd been without her hair and would come out to training rides with her scarf on, and life went on.
So what would you share with other people then? I mean, based on your experiences and somebody who's just been diagnosed, I mean, would you tell them the same thing, or do you have a different insight about it now?
No, I would agree. I don't think I can. If I polled my friends, I don't know that anybody would say I've ever said that, but I do remember during my treatment speaking with a friend who actually had survived a very rare form of cancer a number of years earlier.
Right.
And so we were sharing some similar thoughts, and he said, you know, you just look at the tulips at the front of this house, you look at things like that differently. And he was right. It's a big wake-up call. And then the other side of that would be, what would I say? Well, number one, don't be scared. That does no good.
Right.
Find yourself a doctor that you really have faith in, and I did talk to 2 or 3 actually, so it is definitely a partnership, a team. And then after that, believe.
Yeah.
Believe it can be beaten and have high expectations.
Right.
We all, of course, are very familiar with Lance's story, and
yeah,
I mean the story is far more dramatic than mine. But read his book, I think I would also suggest.
Yeah, I read it.
Yep. This is looking like the Mount Evans Road before it was paved.
Yeah. Yeah, this is pretty nasty. Yeah, the camera broke right off on the way down this thing. Yeah, it wasn't pretty. So I had to do this ride twice. Pretty steep here. We're a 10 out of 10. Cadence right around 60. So, Fran, I mean, how did this change you? I mean, can you put your finger on that?
I honestly can't. Except for what I've just said, which is
giving you a new outlook.
Exactly. You don't cross back over. You don't go back. It's happened. I always thought I took good care of myself. So from that perspective, it was actually a shock.
Right.
I can't say that I do anything very differently now. We'll never know what caused it, but I guess another thing to say would be, unfortunately, it can happen to anybody.
Right.
And taking it in stride.
Just, I guess, a reminder to constantly check yourself, huh?
Yes, definitely.
Didn't you discovered it yourself?
I did. Yeah. Yep.
Little break
right
here.
By chance. And
sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, again, it was lucky that I did. Ironically, I'd had a mammogram only 4 months earlier, and they went back and looked at the film, and the tumor wasn't there. So, had I not found it, which is unlikely because it was quite large.
Yeah.
By the time it had been found on a mammogram, it would have been stage 3, I would imagine.
Wow.
From what I know.
And back up. This is the steepest part of the climb. So how often do you have to get checked out?
Well, I'm now officially dismissed from the oncologist.
You can get out of the saddle here. Yeah.
But I'm pretty cognizant of, what any potential warning signs. So he's just a phone call away if I needed to see him. But there's unfortunately very little that I can do as far as tests. Some types of cancer will show up in a blood test, a blood result, and mine did not, so that's a little disconcerting.
Let's keep dancing on the pedals.
I was going to say, but here we are.
This is
riding.
Yeah.
So enjoy every day and make the most of it.
Yeah.
We're glad we can.
Yeah. All right. Checking that heart rate. Mine's a little higher than I want it to be. Keeping it right around 91%. Watch that cadence. You don't have to spin too hard here. Just a nice 50 RPM climb. It's steep. Well, that grade is showing 10.4% here. That's not necessarily accurate, but it's up there. Well, so we're getting up there. And get out of the saddle again. And get those climbing legs going. Stretch out the legs. Stay light on the hands. Keep focused. Right in front of you. Try to keep your upper body stable, not excessively rocking. Keep the elbows bent.
Straight up.
Head focused and back down. Check your heart rate. Those out of the saddle climbs usually really get the heart rate up. So check your cadence. Still really steep here. So Fred, we're getting there. We got a little bit more to go, but I wanted to get some of your ideas on climbing and training for climbs. I mean, you've done a lot of climbing. I think your biggest ride was Denver to Aspen.
That's right.
How do you train for a climb like that?
Well, I followed the prescription, if you will, of the local sponsoring club for that ride, Rocky Mountain Cycling Club.
Oh yeah.
And they start their scheduled rides in February, to a weekend. And they said, if you follow our rides, come ride with us. I wouldn't say every single ride, but certainly at least once a week with them. They were graduated and they would get longer and tougher. So I followed that plan and rode with them just about every weekend from second or third week in February up until the ride. And then I was training with a couple of people and we we all agreed that from a confidence standpoint we needed a ride even longer than they were doing for their standard weekend rides. So we mapped out 130 miles, which is basically not quite from the start to the end of the climbing, but on this actual ride to Aspen, once you've hit 130 miles, you don't have really any hard riding after that. So we did that probably 3 weeks before the day, and then tapered. Well, the actual day of the ride was one of our infamous spring storms, so it was actually moved a week. So I was more than a little nervous that maybe I had tapered too long, but it all came together and I finished it, not without a struggle I might add, but I did it, and I felt fine at the end. I had some issues going up Independence with hot feet.
Oh yeah. Interesting.
Lost a lot of time because of that, so that's something that I've done some reading on and hope I can mitigate another time, but I think we frankly were more than well prepared. That training plan was it, just lots and lots and lots of long rides with plenty of climbing, and then really a lot of resting in between. Because my riding during the week was minimal, partly because of time and partly because of energy.
Climbing is so physically demanding. I mean, you have to train in moderation with recovery.
Right.
I mean, you can't climb every day. I mean, maybe once or twice a week is all I'll do.
Right.
Just because of the intensity and the amount of fatigue that the muscles undergo as a result of it depends on how steep the grade is.
Yeah.
So now you've done the Mount Evans Hill climb.
Yep.
And we talked about Denver to Aspen and then also Tour of Colorado. I asked you, is there something about climbing that you actually enjoy?
Yeah. It's the sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
Actually that, and I do have this thing about high places. I can't put my finger on it, but I mentioned earlier that I'd done a Greyhound trip around this country, or the eastern part of it, and I think it started in Toronto. Every stop that I took made, like an overnight stop, which would be a major city, I always went to find the highest place. So, New Orleans, I can't remember the building, but there was a tall building there. In each case it was a tall building, obviously, but...
What, did it raise above sea level?
Yeah. So, I'm not quite sure where that comes from, but my father certainly instilled in me a love of the outdoors.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of walking when we were young, my sister, all of us really, but mostly my father and sister and I. And so obviously, by definition, high places generally have fabulous views.
Right.
So it's incredibly rewarding from a visual standpoint.
Yeah. Well, here we are, just getting out of the clouds. You can see the summits are right ahead. So we got a little bit more. See, this disc will end actually before we hit the final summit, but we'll get pretty close to that ridge line up there that you can see. Yeah, so the views, I understand what you mean.
Well, my the year I turned 50, I did my one and only bicycle tour abroad, and I went down to the south of France, and that week culminated in Mont Ventoux, and it was just spectacular. The climb was amazing, all the history associated with it. Of course, Tommy Simpson's grave, memorial rather, excuse me.
Right.
And I mean, you can see for miles and miles on a clear day, you can see the Mediterranean from up there.
Wow.
So it's just very cool.
Well, there's 3 aspects of climbing that I think most of us have to battle. The mental, emotional, the physical aspect of it, and also the dietary. I mean, the diet that you, or what you eat plays a huge role in your success. Can you enlighten us on those 3, what you do, or?
2 of the 3.
Okay.
I've never had much luck.
Dieting?
Yeah. I lost
How did I know that?
Well, I lost about, in fact, the year I turned 30. I remember I was contemplating a new bike, and the penny dropped, and I said to myself, you're going to spend all that money to shave off 2 or 3 pounds.
Right.
You know the rest of the story.
Yeah, I do.
So I actually lost and kept off most of 15 pounds. So it comes down to willpower if I'm actually going to lose any more, but I'm sure it wouldn't hurt. But as far as the other 2 aspects, I mean, which is more important?
Well, have you ever been on a mountain that you thought was going to defeat you? Or have you thought about turning around? I mean, okay, so the question is basically, when you get to that point where you feel like abandoning the ride, turning around and going home, what do you do? What do you say to yourself?
Not allowed. I said I was going to do it.
So just stubbornness.
I gotta do it. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Stubbornness and knowing how good I'll feel when I've accomplished it. I mean, I did stop a lot on Independence Pass, and frankly, that bugged me.
Getting off the bike.
Even though I said I'd never do that ride again, I can already feel another attempt coming where I can climb most of the pass without having to stop. And once I got onto the steepest part, actually the foot issue pretty much went away, but I did stop once purely to get a rest.
Right.
And I would like to not have done that. They don't stop in the tour, you know.
Yeah, right.
They don't stop in the racing around Mount Evans Hill Climb.
That's right.
They didn't stop in the course, so...
yeah, it's a kick in the behind.
Actually, I do have one that's defeated me. Magnolia Road, outside Boulder.
Okay.
So incredibly steep.
Is that the one that goes up to that campground? At the very top? I don't know the names of the roads.
I'm sure there's plenty of camping along it. It's...
I know there's one that winds through the valley and it just goes straight up.
No, it goes straight up from Boulder Canyon.
Okay.
It's usually the Mike Horgan Hill Climb, which is held most years, and they alternate between Sugarloaf Road and Magnolia. So when I was racing with the women's team out of Boulder several years ago, we all decided we'd go and have a training ride to get ready for Mike Horgan, or Mike Horrible, as somebody coined this race. And I couldn't get up it. I absolutely could not turn the cranks.
That's steep, huh?
Yeah, very annoying.
Yeah.
I'm looking around everybody else's gears and trying to find an excuse. I'd just come up from a week in Texas, so I thought maybe I'd lost my mountain lungs, you know.
Right.
But I've since gone back and still haven't got up it, so
Oh man.
maybe there's a goal for this year.
There you go.
Get a bigger cassette,
Yeah.
so I'm guaranteed, hopefully,
You have a compact on
success.
that?
No, I don't.
No, that would help too.
Yes. Yeah, I'd conveniently forgotten about that one, but
Yeah. Colorado's kind of. I mean, if you're gonna ride a double, that's what you need. Now we're just slowly cranking up this. We're getting to the top of the hill. And we're going to transition to day 2 shortly. You can see the top of the climb just in that little V niche right up there. And then we got the false summit. And then disc 2 will have a little bit more climbing and nice fun descent. And a little more climbing. So disc 2, 45 minutes, but it's still a good workout, either all by itself or as a companion to this first climb. I did it in one day, so can you. I did it twice, damn it. Well, Fran, I think little false summit here, and a little bit more climbing.